שלום לכם, אני שמחה להנחות את מושב אחר הצהריים. אני אורית חזן, אני ראש המחלקה להוראת הטכנולוגיה והמדעים בטכניון כמובן. המחלקה שלנו ארגנה את הכינוס הזה בשיתוף פעולה מצוין, כמו שיכולתם לראות, עם האקדמיה המדעית הישראלית למדעים ועם הנהלת הטכניון לציון 100 שנה להנחת אבן הפינה של הטכניון. אבן הפינה הונחה במקום שבו שוכן היום המוזיאון הלאומי למדע, טכנולוגיה וחלל, שבו תארך אחרי המושב הזה קבלת פנים לכל באי הכינוס, אלו שנרשמו ואלה שלא נרשמו, כולם מוזמנים. אחר כך אני אוסיף פרטים על ההסעות. אני אעבור ברשותכם לאנגלית, להציג את משתתפי הדיון הראשון שלנו, בהנחייתה של דוקטור אילנה דיין, על דברים שרואים משם, מבט מבחוץ על התקשורת המדע בישראל. Our first discussion is on things that you see from there, an outside look at science communication in Israel, and I'm honored to invite to the stage Nensy, the president of the U.S. National Association of Science Writers. רוברט קרולוויץ from the National Public Radio. And Paul Hofman, the author and president of the Library Science Center. And the discussion will be led by the leading TV, radio, investigative reporter, Dr. Ilana Dayan.
Delighted to have with us these three special guests, all of them, by the way, with very unique and exciting experience in the art of making science accessible to us laymen. And I'm sure that some of you have heard them in the morning. Still, I want to get to know them a little bit. Nensy is an award-winning journalist who has worked as a writer and editor for national magazines, television and radio reporter covering technology for U.S. News and World Report, right? Senior writer for U.S. News covering health policy, neuroscience, pediatric, etc. She contributes to National Public Radio, National Geographic, Scientific American, and other publications, and currently she serves as president of NASW, the National Association of Science Writers in the U.S. I'm sure you've already had the pleasure to know Robert Krullwich. It sounds like a Glenn Close thing in the movies.
I think it used to be Krulevich, and then somebody, one of my great-grand-uncles, became involved in prostitution and was arrested, so my grandfather changed the name to Krulwich, thinking no one would remember the other guy.
That's the sure way to become a sponsor of a very important establishment in Israel. Anyway, Robert is the science correspondent for NPR, co-host of Radiolab, appears regularly on ABC's Nightline, ABC News Tonight, and Good Morning America as special correspondent. He won the Emmy Award, among other awards, but perhaps more importantly, Robert has proven that almost all complex subjects can be clearly explained, even in a fun way, thus having TV Guide call him the most inventive network reporter on television. And Paul, I'd like to start with you. Paul Hofman is a writer, a journalist, lecturer, creator of puzzle contests. You'll have to explain to us about that. President, as Orit said, of the Liberty Science Center in Jersey City, and a biography whose work explores the relationship between genius, madness, obsession, and creativity. The Chicago magazine once called him the smartest man in the world, and Paul was modest enough to say that that's only because they caught him in a particularly good day. Paul, I took a book that you wrote 11 or 13 years ago, rather, The Man Who Loved Only Numbers, a book about the story of Paul Erdős and the search for mathematical truth. I knew almost nothing about this unique, eccentric Hungarian mathematician, much less so about the Ramsey theory and the other contributions he had to mathematics, but I couldn't take my eyes off your text. Take me back to the drawing board. How do you approach such a project?
I mean, he was an incredible singular character, okay, for one thing. And I'm a profile writer. Mostly I write about science, but I've written about chess players, I've written about the commonality to everything I write about is people that do what they do incredibly passionately and obsessively, spending 20 hours a day doing it. In this case, Paul Erdős, until the age of 83, spent literally 20 to 22 hours a day doing mathematics. I followed him around when I was in my early 30s and he was 73, and I couldn't keep up with him. I would sleep on people's couches watching him. He was homeless. He made a tour of 25 countries, showing up unannounced on the doorsteps of fellow mathematicians, and he would say, "My brain is open," which meant challenge me with your toughest mathematical problem. And he would stay as your uninvited house guest until you ran out of exciting problems to challenge him with.
And then when he would want to call someone on the West Coast and they tell him it's 5 o'clock in the morning over there.
Right, and he would say, "That's good, it means they'll be home." And he would let nothing stand in the way of solving mathematical problems. He thought it was his mission on Earth, not just to do them personally, but he was kind of the Johnny Appleseed of mathematics. He would know what your strengths are, and then he would come across a mathematician in Japan who was working on something similarly, immediately put you together so you could solve things. So I was looking for, first of all, I wrote the occasional piece about mathematics for the New York Times, which meant I was going broke because they wouldn't let me do it too often. And one of the mathematicians I had written about said, "You really should meet this guy. He's an incredible character." And I did, and I immediately was incredibly taken with him, and I followed him for a month. And that's what I do with, I have the luxury of the kind of journalism that I do, because it really is book writing. I spin them off into New Yorker profiles or Atlantic profiles, but spending an awful lot of time with the person that I write about.
And you have the luxury of spending an awful lot of time with the character. You have the luxury of writing a book, a biography, which is unlike a short TV piece or even an article in the newspaper. You have the luxury of having an exciting character. Still, do you know a compromise when you see it, when you have to write about external combinatorics or the theorems that the guy, or the sentences that he has proven, you know that you have to make some compromises because you want everyday guys to read the book?
Absolutely, and that was a difficult part about it. I followed him for a month. I saw lots of ways in which he interacted. I got a sense of him as a human being and his life story. A lot of the mathematics I didn't understand. I didn't want to interrupt him when he was working with some Nobel Prize winner on solving an important theorem. But afterwards, I went back and I spent a couple months trying to understand it with third parties that helped me. I try to boil the stuff down, but I don't want to lose the math. One of the things I tried to do in this book is, because he's such a compelling personality, is it allows you to go deeper into the mathematics than you might be able to in another setting, because people have patience for that, because he's an incredible character.
And that's exactly the question that I want now to bounce on you, Nancy. What do you do when you have no character? You have a huge story, you have what Ayelet here calls the wow factor. It's an amazing scientific revelation. You want to write about it. There is no character, there is no Erdős. What do you do then? She needs the microphone.
Hi. Well, as you know, if it's a wow story, then to me that says it's going to affect a lot of people, right? There's something big going on here. So you could always use the straight news ploy and say, hey, if it's something about a new drug that's going to help millions of people with high blood pressure or something like that, people just want the straight news. And those stories are fun, they're gratifying, you're explaining something complex that people need to know, and that's pretty straightforward. I think the ones that are more challenging to me personally, that I've had more struggles with, are the ones where you have to talk about what's going on in science that's contested and controversial, and how does that conflict with people's social beliefs and their emotional beliefs. Well, a good example, I've been writing a lot about treatments for autism. And there are no evidence-based medical cures for autism.
Okay.
But there are many parents in the United States who desperately want to help their children. So they try many, many unproven, untested cures on their children, some of which are very dangerous.
What happens when you run a story saying this is not a credible method? This is bullshit.
Well, we run those stories and parents don't listen, because they want to believe, and I think I'm a parent too. If I had a desperately ill child, I would want to do anything I could for that child. So my question was, as a journalist, because I believe in science, I believe in science, what would it take for me to give my child a medical treatment that could be dangerous or even deadly? what would drive me to do that? And so that then led me to think of who would I find who's been on that journey? Because the doctors who are saying these are not safe treatments have not been there. I would need to find that kind of parent. So I do think in that case I did have to go back to a human, and I actually found a parent of a child with severe, 2 children actually with severe autism, who had been down that journey and had tried untested treatments on his child, and what made it even more compelling and tragic is that he was a physician. He was a medical doctor.
Now, if you don't have the headline, you don't have the news element, you don't have the wow factor, and you don't have the human interest dimension, then we have no story. I mean, even, forgive me that I'm giving the example, Professor Shechtman, our Nobel laureate, has just stepped in, and I wonder whether his amazing revelation back in 1983 could have made the headline. I wouldn't know how to make a TV story out of it. I'm embarrassed to say.
See,
You would? Well, Robert would.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, what is a scientist really doing? A scientist is looking at the world, sees a pattern out there, and then proposes essentially a story to him or herself. Says, well, if blah, 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 then blah. So then what you do is you go out into the world and you try to see if that happens. If it happens once, that's nice, but if it happens again and again and again and again and again, then you think, wow, my story may be true. But viewed that way, scientists are just storytellers with a highly technical way of doing it.
And what about us or you as the storyteller of the storytellers?
Well, there's an adventure, I think, in saying, okay, here's his guess. He thinks if blah, 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 then let's see. That's a little exciting. So then you lean in, you say, here, let's try it. The other day I was doing one, this dude, it was a guy named Chamwitz in Beersheba or someplace, sent me a really great manuscript of a book in which he proposed that plants smell. And he said, here's a vine that actually smells tomatoes and strangles them. And he says, now I'm going to rely on the experiments. And I read the paper of the scientist, and she said, okay, I'm putting the vine in the ground. It's dark. It doesn't see anything. It's in the earth, so it can't smell or hear. It just smells dirt, I guess. Now up it comes, and I put a tomato plant. And another day, she put a pretend tomato plant made entirely of plastic. The next day, she put a tomato plant behind a beach ball. The next day, she put a tomato plant in a box. And each time, when possible, this vine went woo, woo. Now, if she's the tomato plant, it went woo, 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 and ate her. That pretty much proved that the tomato plant could do something through what would be the equivalent of a nose. And it was done so carefully that the only explanation you could discover at the end of the day was this tomato plant was actually somehow smelling, this vine was somehow smelling the tomato plant. That's exciting. And there's no main characters except, I guess, the vine.
But it's about murder. That's why it was exciting.
I'm sorry to be, the one who breaks the party, but I'm just imagining my editor when you come to him and tell him, I have a great story for you. It can open the newscast about a tomato that can smell.
Killer vines.
Killer vines, secrets revealed. You're the tomato. Actually, there's so many people who garden and try to plant tomatoes, they hate this vine.
Will killer vines that kill tomatoes also cure cancer? That would do it. Your editor would do it. Just throw the question mark in there. It always works.
My question really, Robert, is, I guess what I'm really asking is if one has to work within the conventional media paradigm within which I'm working, or can we reinvent, and I guess that you have reinvented the paradigm, narrating differently, editing differently, shooting differently.
Well, you don't want to be in a broadcast that goes la 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 la. You don't want to be the screen because it embarrasses you and it makes you look stupid. So you have to find the rhythm of the world you're in. So in a CBS or an ABC, you can't do anything radical, but you can work really, really hard to do something a little bit different. Like I tried to put cartoons of economic things on the evening newscast. They were animations with line drawings.
And even to use Barbie and Ken.
Well, that too, but see, Barbie and Ken, that was on at 8 o'clock, and American women love Barbie, so that was no-brainer. But But to put live tomatoes on the evening newscast in a cartoon, that would be really hard. So you sit down with your boss and you say, are you quite sure that a couple sitting in Texas, if they see a cartoon in the middle of your news program, will say, oh my God, they just put a cartoon on that television show. I am never going to watch ABC News again. And they say, yes, that's what we're scared of. I say, but your ads have cartoons in them. And those people don't leave when they say, why can't you be at least as adventurous as your advertisers? And 1 out of 7 times you win. And that's Babe Ruth record. That's Pele.
Now, Nancy, let's talk about, we've been talking a little bit about the dialogue with the editor or with the desk, but let's talk about the dialogue with the scientific community. How much do they really want to know, do they really want the world to know about what they do? Because they have this image of an in-world laboratory guys who don't really need anybody to know about their mere existence, which is not really the case.
So you want to know, are all scientists really introverts? Or rock stars? Or in between? I think that it really, I mean, some people do go into research because they really truly only want to talk to their petri dishes. And I think those people really struggle with communicating with the public, which is why institutions have public information officers, and which is why it's really good they're science journalists. But I think there's a lot of scientists who are already hugely excited about their work and really eager to talk to the public about it. And then it's a question of having a dialogue with them, using our expertise as journalists and thinking about how to communicate those ideas in a way that is easily accessible.
But here's the basic dichotomy. I mean, these people dedicate their lives to the search of truth. They do it with in-depth, they do it with patience, they do it with endless intellectual resources, and they do it in a manner which is really the absolute opposite of the way a journalist works. They do it this way, not this way. Isn't there a basic tension between what they do and what you do?
You mean you wouldn't want me to reduce 30 years of your life's work into a paragraph?
I guess they wouldn't.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But, you know, it's the same thing with their mother or their grandmother. She also isn't going to, you know, listen to the 30-year story. Maybe, 15 years or so. So it's a struggle they have with all of humanity, not just journalists, frankly.
What's the most brutal criticism you ever got from a scientist on whom you wrote or ran a piece?
I haven't, it's usually that they're sorry I had to leave things out, and I try to be very upfront with them and say, you know what we're doing here. You know how much space, here's how much space I have, here's what we can do. And usually, if it's a topic you're covering, you're going to be talking to them again. It's not their last chance. It's an ongoing conversation, and one that can be a really rich, fruitful conversation as you go forward. To think of somebody I talked to when they were first starting on their postdoctoral research, and now you see them getting close to the Dr. Sheckman level, it's pretty exciting.
Are they sometimes embarrassed, Paul, about the fact that they need publicity?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot better than when I started in the field, but still the scientific community in a whole doesn't really reward popularization of science. I mean, you look at someone like Jared Diamond, who's stuck in the geography department because he's writing best-selling books. Some of it may be jealousy also. He's making a lot more money than his colleagues down the hall. Carl Sagan, who was blackballed from the National Academy of Science. Now it's gotten better. More and more scientists are
It's like if you're popular, it says something bad about you as a scientist. If you're popular, you must not be deep enough.
Yes, you're not doing your work. I mean, Carl Sagan's calculations are responsible for most of our planetary probes, so he did very good work, and yet he wasn't allowed in the National Academy of Sciences. It's interesting. I had an experience about 15 years ago with Vera Rubin, very esteemed astronomer who's basically her work on the measurements of galaxies and showing that the measurements weren't correct based on accepted theory laid the work for the theory about dark matter. Very respected. She couldn't get into Princeton because they wouldn't accept women in graduate school as astronomy. Anyway, I wanted to do a long profile of her because I edited Discover magazine. And I explained to her that it would take a few days, that I wouldn't be talking to her for those days, but I needed to hang out and watch what she did. And she refused. She kept turning me down. After 4 months, she sort of begrudgingly agreed. And when the article came out, she got 30 or 40 letters within 2 months from mostly moms, but some dads too, saying that their daughters were interested in astronomy and now they had a role model for going into it. And she called me up and was quite apologetic about giving me a hard time about doing it. So it does make a difference. It makes a difference for kids to have role models in the sciences.
Tell me about your most amazing experience with a scientist.
Well, it's troubling, actually. I do a program which considers complex stories, complex issues. Mostly they're science. But one time we were dealing with a very complex issue, which is why do good things happen to bad people? Which is a philosophical or perhaps stupid question.
I was thinking about it with my mom last night.
Yeah. So I chose as my text for that being Isaac on Har Zion with Abraham. And the reaction from my audience was fierce and very unpleasant. They did not want to hear Abraham or Isaac or any biblical references in their territory. They thought they were listening to a program that was about science, and they didn't want to hear God or any godly stuff mentioned. And I said, well, this is not a question that is amenable to scientific exploration. You can't do a test to find out what happens, why nice people have horrible diseases, or why children get run over by trucks. That's just not a science question. But it is a stories that people tell each other for ages, and I do not understand why you're so mad at me. And my partner on the broadcast, finally, it got so ugly. I get him off. This is our program. I said, first of all, it's our program. It belongs to me and that other guy and not you. But B, how dare you? And C, what's wrong with you? And D, haven't you ever asked the question yourself? And how, by the way, do you answer such a question? You can't go to a test tube for that. So my biggest trouble was actually with my peeps, my posse, or whatever the hip hop phrase would be. And I was very surprised by the fact that people who think of themselves as tolerant were so intolerant in that regard.
But on the other hand, with the scientific community, do you find them more and more cooperative as time goes by?
Yes, for pretty much the reasons Paul says. I think also, and this is, I guess, important, the United States is, people have gotten the idea, somehow, that what scientists do is they go off into a room somewhere and they come up with an idea, and the idea that they have, whether it's evolution or something, is going to take from us, the ordinary people, it's going to take away the logic of our life. We're not going to live holy lives, relationships and traditions will be questioned too much. And these people, these scientists, they're coming after us and things that matter to us. So you get these fights in the United States about there are moral questions, or don't you do stem cell research, that's killing babies, or don't you. And now scientists need the freedom to explore. And in a diverse society, in order to keep the right to be a player and to do science, you can't just stay in a laboratory and just do your science, because someone may take away your test tube. So what do you have? You have your stories. And what you know is that people do want to know, why doesn't a cloud fall down? It seems very heavy up there. Why doesn't it fall down? And you say, I know. And they want to keep you in the room to tell that story. And you have to be out there telling stories in order to have the legitimacy, the voice, and the money to do your work. So storytelling is not something that's a luxury. I think what's happened since Carl Sagan's time is that people now regard it as essential to doing business. And if you aren't telling stories, they may take away your business.
You know, I'm hearing Robert speaking so passionately about it. Both of you have covered other subjects before. You find it more fun to cover science?
Oh, I've covered the Supreme Court, I've covered Congress, I've covered the White House. Science is way more fun.
You want to relate to what Robert said?
Yeah, I'm learning. I get paid to learn something new every day and talk to these really interesting people. You know, it's like the best grad school you could ever imagine. So how lucky is that? It's fantastic.
You know, I want to take the couple of minutes we have left to try and to talk techniques. because when I hear that you landed in Oprah's studio to talk about the future of technology, and you go to David Letterman to do some mathematics tricks?
Mathematical puzzles I demonstrated, yes.
With paper folding. I guess you were the first one on Oprah who didn't talk about child abuse and dysfunctional families.
The hour was too short to describe my dysfunctional childhood, so instead we talked about the future of technology.
But you must be aware of the fact, or somehow alert to the fact that your audience is so much accustomed to another rhetoric, to another kind of speak. I mean, they're not accustomed. The audience that tunes into Oprah expects something else. Aren't you?
Well, I cracked a few jokes in the middle of it. But, I mean, I think the thing about science is that what makes it formidable to people is the fact that it's in a jargon that they don't understand. So if you can strip it of the jargon the way you did this morning when you showed the video about viruses, it makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm not a believer in that the only stories that you should cover are news you can use. Of course it's important. There's a new cure for a disease that may affect someone you know or a member of your family. But I edited Discover magazine for 10 years. The stories that did the best for us were actually ones that asked wondrous questions. You know, how old is the universe? You know, what are the differences between men and women? I mean, we see external differences. Are there any brain differences? I mean, these are like huge jigsaw puzzles that each year scientists puts a new puzzle piece on the table, but most of it's left uncovered. And if you approach them as puzzles, if you approach them also as scientists not delivering some God-given truth, but that theories today might be overturned, that someone works on something for 2 years and it's a false start. I mean, the problem, the textbooks I grew up on presented everything in this linear way. But if you tell it through the way that human beings have discovered it, it's a lot more accessible. And you look at Time magazine, their best-selling covers constantly are ones on things like the sun, new theory of how the sun gets energy. They're not their stories about heart disease, believe it or not.
Breastfeeding 12-year-olds.
Or breastfeeding 12-year-olds.
I want to take the next few minutes to a little experiment. I brought from home 5 subjects on which I know some, but very little. And I wanted to try, each one can volunteer, any one of you can volunteer, to take the subject that I throw in and try to explain it to me like I were a 12-year-old. Okay? Nancy, let's go first. What's the difference between a virus and a bacteria?
Oh, they're both bad. They can both kill you.
Some bacteria.
Why is it that they tell me that antibiotics doesn't help if I have a virus?
No, the antibiotics only kills the bacteria bugs. For virus bugs, you got to use different drugs. And viruses are sneaky and stealthy, and they have good disguises. Bacteria, much more straightforward guys. They're kind of like the guys hanging out in your alley. You know they're there, but you walk on the other side of the street.
This was great. Robert, where do numbers come from? Where do numbers come from?
Nobody knows. You can give an elephant a box, and you can show that there's 1 delicious thing, 5 delicious things, and many, many delicious things. Would the elephant know that it's most efficient and most rewarding to go to the mini box? Only smart elephants. Dumb elephants go, oh. So does that mean you have to be extra smart to know the difference between many and some? Or when does many and some kick in with a little baby girl or a little baby boy? Is 1 something everybody knows about? There are people in the world who live with languages that have 1, more than 1, and no other words. So they can't, if you say to them, tell me, well, how many children do you have? He goes, many. Now, how do they do things like do business? Like if I say, I'll work for you for some amount of time if you give me some raisins. I don't know. So it is a mystery to me. Apparently, human beings have a sense of some, none, and many, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those seem to be human inventions which are smacked onto babies when they have to go into 3rd and 4th and 5th grade. And the people who walk around thinking, I can't do this, may be much more natural than mom or dad would ever allow them to think.
I gotta have my editor meet you. I have a choice for you. Do you want to talk about nanotechnology or DNA?
No, I'm going to talk about numbers again.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Be my guest. Go ahead. Yeah, I should think so.
Because I like numbers. Now, yes, it's true. Nobody knows where numbers come from. But what's interesting about numbers in mathematics is it transcends the world in a way that the sciences don't. So Aristotle thought our hearts were where our heads were and our brains were where our hearts were, and he was wrong. And almost everything the ancient Greeks knew about biology or astronomy was wrong, okay? But what they knew about mathematics is as true today as it was true then. I mean, Euclid proved 2,300 years ago that there are an infinite number of prime numbers. Prime numbers are numbers that are only divisible by themselves in 1, like 3, 5, 7. 9 is not prime because it's 3 times 3. 11 is prime. There's an infinite number of prime numbers, okay? If you prove something in mathematics, it's proven. I mean, you could have screwed up, and one of your colleagues will say, hey, that should have been a minus sign. But if the proof is correct, it's correct for eternity. It's correct on Venus. There'd be prime numbers on Jupiter. Wherever there are sentient beings, if they're going to start talking about quantities and considering them. So it differs from the sciences in that respect, okay? It is finding truth. Where this truth comes from, who knows? Some mathematicians believe it's out there, and all you're doing is discovering truths that are out there. Other mathematicians believe they're creating these truths. But regardless, they are truths in a way that there aren't truths in any of the other sciences.
You know what? So do politicians. Nancy, last one for you. How come DNA is the mother of all indictments? How come DNA is the most conclusive way to locate a suspect in the scene of the crime?
Is it really? Well, we watch CSI and the shows, and it looks like, you just take a little tiny blood spot batter or things like that, or a piece of hair, and you automatically ID the suspect. Right now, it looks like DNA is the most accurate process we have. It's better than the other things because you have unique DNA to yourself, but so would your identical twin, right? And there would be other things you could look at to separate. So it's the best we have so far. It's a pretty good recipe, but that doesn't mean we can't screw it up in the lab.
There's a case going on in court in Israel nowadays that we could tell you a lot about, but I was heading at CSI for a reason. Does it help? Does it truly contribute to the access of people to science, to curiosity, to understanding the world around them, or it just storytelling, television drama?
I think it's both. Do you know that House, that cranky doctor show, is the world's most popular TV drama right now? About a British guy playing an American doctor with a drug habit? But
a genius in diagnostics.
Yeah, that's it. He's solving mysteries about ourselves, our bodies, and science. And I think that's the lure. He's solving deep mysteries about the human body and how we think. And that's so alluring, it obviously translates into every language.
He's the only one smarter than Paul.
No, so was MacGyver. You remember MacGyver?
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to ask each and every one of you, just very briefly, to take 2 sentences on this subject that we are discussing this afternoon. If you had to tell one sentence to a scientist and one to the media, what would it be about the dialogue and the cooperation between the 2 worlds? Do you want Robert to start?
Yeah.
I would say to the scientist, be careful, but this could work out for you. And I would say to the reporter, tell him that you don't understand what he just said.
And try to prepare yourself at home.
I would say to the reporter, be careful, because you might not, you don't know as much as you think you do, but that's a good thing. And I would say to the scientist, be brave. A little mistake isn't going to change your life, and great things might happen.
We have a brave one coming up. But Paul, your last one.
Well, I'd say to the scientists, lighten up, talk to the public, After all, most science is funded, at least in the United States, by taxpayer dollars, so talk to you about it. And then to journalists, just put a question mark after your headline, you can't be wrong.
We are running out of time, but if there's a question or two from the audience, we'll take one. If not, then Robert, I will borrow a sentence. You tell me when you said it, but you said it somewhere, so I read, and it sounds like something that's fair to conclude with this discussion. You said, this is a time when our gaze has widened, and this is a show, Nova, about what we can see now. This is a profession about what we can see now, right?
Yeah, I don't remember saying that, but yeah, it's... I think so. I think the tools are now so available. So if you decide you want to know about a tomato plant, instead of having to go to a library and talk to a librarian and wait for the book and sit at the desk and get the book and have to give it back in 2 hours and then take the bus home, you don't have to do any of those things anymore. You just go to a convenient piece of furniture which you might be carrying in your pocket, and you write in certain keywords, and all of the world's previous knowledge is available to you. So there, all of a sudden, I still am amazed how quickly I can find out about something. Because 10 years ago it was slower, and 20 years ago it seemed suddenly impossible. And I think that's amazing. And the people who have been doing it for only 9 or 10 years, who are now 13 years old, I watch 13-year-olds explore the world, and they have no idea how easy it is for them. And I suppose they're going to invent ideas to make the next set of 13-year-olds, 13 years from now, bored with them. And it's kind of amazing to be alive at a time. I mean, most of Earth, you were a farmer, you taught your kids how to farm, and you died. Then he was a farmer, he taught his kids how to farm, or she, and then they died. And then you did it again, and you did it again. Now you wake up and your kid's got something you've never heard of. The gadget is unbelievable, and all you can do is stare. I think it's kind of fascinating.
On the other hand, I guess a year ago I asked my daughter, have you seen Yair lately? She said, no, his webcam is out of order.
Yeah, I have a 13-year-old, and his mom won't let him watch any R-rated movies. But he knows the plot of every single R-rated movie because he's read hundreds of them on Wikipedia.
So much for banning. I want to thank you very much, Nancy, Robert, and Paul. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.